At family dinner, my dad yelled, "You'll never be as successful as your brother." My aunt whispered, "She's just bitter she couldn't keep a man," but when I bought their childhood home and tore it down, my cousins cried and blocked me. Growing up in a small town in southern Texas, family meant everything. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and your reputation could make or break you. But for me, it wasn't about how well the community knew us, it was more about the suffocating grip my family held on me. My dad, Theodore Morris, was a man of rigid principles. There was no room for error in his world. You either succeeded, or you failed. Simple as that. My brother, Kyle, was the model of success in his eyes, charming, ambitious, always striving to outdo himself. Me? I was the black sheep. I didn't chase after the things that seemed to matter so much to him: money, status, approval. I became a writer instead of a corporate mogul. I found peace in my own solitude rather than in the picture-perfect family life he envisioned for me. It didn't help that my mother, a silent presence in our home, had long ago given up on trying to get my dad to understand me. She was there in body, but emotionally distant, watching us all from a distance, just as I did. One evening, my dad decided to host one of his infamous family dinners. These were regular events, ones where everyone gathered under the roof of the same house we'd all grown up in. The conversations would always revolve around how successful Kyle had become and how disappointed my dad was with my life choices. But I had learned to cope with it. What else could I do? On that night, I was surrounded by the usual suspects: my dad, my Aunt Rachel, Kyle, and a few cousins. Everyone was chatting away, discussing things like the weather, my brother's business ventures, and the new house he'd just bought. I could feel the gap between me and them growing with each passing word. It wasn't just that I wasn't interested in their conversations, it was that I never felt like I was part of their world. I had always been the other. The one who didn't fit in. And, as usual, my dad had no problem reminding me of that. "Natalie," he said suddenly, breaking through the chatter. The table fell silent. "You'll never be as successful as your brother." His words sliced through the air. I swallowed the lump in my throat. There it was again, the same criticism that had been thrown my way since I could remember. But instead of retreating into the familiar shame, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to apologize for the life I'd chosen. I wasn't going to shrink in the face of his judgment anymore. I took a deep breath, but before I could respond, my Aunt Rachel, who always seemed to have an opinion about everything, leaned in from across the table and said something under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's just bitter she couldn't keep a man," Rachel whispered, her voice dripping with condescension. I felt my face flush, but I didn't react immediately. Rachel had always been a source of subtle judgment in our family. She thought my singleness, my lack of conventional success, meant there was something wrong with me. I could feel the weight of her words, but I was determined to not let them control me. But I wasn't going to let my aunt or my father have the last word. I remained silent, letting the awkward tension build until it felt suffocating. The dinner dragged on, and I could sense the invisible barrier between me and everyone else growing. They were all so busy with their own lives, their own successes, their own accomplishments. They couldn't understand that I didn't need to measure my worth by the things they thought were important. After dinner, I excused myself early. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or pretending that everything was fine. As I left the house, the memories flooded back. That house, our childhood home, was the place where everything had started. Where my father's expectations had been rooted in the foundation of the walls, where I had felt so small for so long. I hated that house. Not because it had any particular physical defects, but because it represented everything I had never been able to live up to in my family's eyes. And that's when the idea came to me. The decision: I didn't need that house. In fact, I didn't need anything from the past. So, I did something that shocked even me. I decided to buy our childhood home. Not to live in it, not for nostalgia, but to let it go. To destroy the physical embodiment of everything my father had tried to make me feel about myself. I hired a crew, paid the price, and had the house torn down. The moment I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of freedom wash over me. It wasn't just about the house, it was about taking control of my life. It was about refusing to let the past define me anymore. For once, I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing this for me. When Kyle found out, he didn't understand. He didn't take it well at all. He called me, his voice shaking with frustration. Why would you do that? That house was part of our past, part of our family's history. But I wasn't interested in his reasoning. It's just a house, Kyle. It was never a home for me. It was just a symbol of everything my father tried to make me feel. I hung up before he could say anything more. I wasn't going to engage in a conversation where my worth was being debated. I had made my decision, and I was at peace with it. The aftermath, the real fallout, came when my cousins, who were much younger than Kyle and me, found out. They were devastated. For them, the house held memories of their own childhood, a place of family gatherings, of warmth, and of the illusion that everything was fine. They didn't understand why I would destroy something so sentimental. When they heard about the demolition, they called me. They were furious. They cried. They said they couldn't believe I'd done something like that. To them, I was the villain, the one who had destroyed their memories. They blocked me on social media, and within days, I felt the full brunt of their anger. Rachel also reached out, but it wasn't an apology. It was a reprimand, a long message about how I'd ruined everything. "You've burned every bridge, Natalie," she wrote. "What you did wasn't just selfish. It was cruel." But I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel like I'd done anything wrong. In fact, I felt like I had taken my power back. What was the point of holding on to a house full of painful memories just because others thought it was precious? The truth is, I had done something that my family would never understand, and it hurt. But it also set me free in a way I never expected. In tearing down that house, I had torn down all the expectations, the judgment, and the lingering resentment that had been placed on me for years. Reflection: I haven't spoken to my cousins or my father since the whole incident. My brother has reached out occasionally, but he's been distant, caught in the middle of trying to keep peace. But I'm not interested in peace at the cost of my self-worth. I'm living for myself now, and I don't care if my family can't accept that. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm no longer fighting for a place at the table. I'm not playing by their rules. I'm building my own life, one where I define my own success. And no matter what anyone else thinks, that's enough for me. To be continued. You said, continue do not include ending yet. ChatGPT said, continued. The weeks after the demolition passed in a strange blur. It wasn't exactly peace I found, but rather a hollow sense of freedom that left me wondering what it all meant. I had taken a major step, yes, but the silence from my family was deafening. I expected backlash from them, but I didn't expect the isolation that came with it. Kyle, for all his outward success, had always been someone who was just fine with the status quo. He had never questioned our father's way of doing things, and honestly, I don't think he ever understood the depth of the conflict I felt growing up. He was a natural at navigating that world of business meetings and networking events, and in many ways, I think he resented that I hadn't played the game. That I had been different. Now, with the house gone, it seemed as if all the careful facades my family had worked so hard to maintain were crumbling too. Kyle sent me a few texts in the days after the demolition, his tone surprisingly more subdued than usual. The first text was simple, one I assumed he copied from some advice column. "I know things are tense right now, but I think we need to talk about this. You can't just erase the past like that." I stared at it for a while before typing out a reply. My fingers hovered over the screen as I debated. I could feel my old habits creeping back in, the desire to explain myself, to justify my actions, to make him see why it was my decision to make. But something inside me told me not to. I didn't owe him, or anyone, an explanation. So, I deleted the message and sent only one line: "I don't think I'm ready to talk." The response was quick. Too quick. "Okay. But please, let me know when you are." That was it. He never reached out again in the weeks that followed. It felt like a quiet surrender, and it made me feel even more disconnected from him. What had once been my closest relationship now felt like a fragile string, pulled so taut that any contact would snap it entirely. Time passed slowly, the days stretched on, each one blending into the next. I returned to my work as a freelance writer, something that had always given me a sense of purpose, though lately, it felt harder to focus. The weight of my decisions still sat heavily on my chest, not because I regretted them, but because I was unsure of what came next. What did I want now? What did any of this mean? I tried to distract myself by diving deeper into my writing. My assignments were coming in steadily, but I found it harder and harder to shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered whenever I wasn't working. I'd spend nights sitting in my small apartment, staring at the walls, thinking about the past. Memories of the house, its creaky floors, the narrow hallway where my father had once stood, towering over me with his sharp words, would resurface in vivid flashes. But it was never a comforting nostalgia. It was the reminder of how small I had felt growing up, of how I had always been on the outside, looking in. I started drinking more in the evenings. Just a glass of wine at first, but then a second. Sometimes a third. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I could tell I was using it as a way to numb the pain. The evenings were the worst. When the silence stretched on longer than I could bear, I would think of the house again, the noise of the demolition, the way the rubble had piled up as the wrecking crew took apart the walls that had once confined me. The call that changed everything then, just as I was beginning to get used to the isolation, I got a call that I wasn't expecting. It was from my cousin, Ava. Ava had always been a little different from the rest of the family. She was closer to me in age, and she had a quiet, contemplative nature that I appreciated. While the others focused on appearances and success, Ava had always been more grounded. So when her name popped up on my phone, I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Natalie, her voice sounded small, almost fragile, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to reach out. "I need to talk to you." I felt a lump in my throat. I hadn't spoken to her since the whole mess with the house. In fact, I hadn't heard from any of the family members since they blocked me. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know how to say this," she paused, clearly struggling. I miss you. I don't think what you did was wrong. I don't think the house was ever really ours to begin with. And I'm sorry for the way everyone's treated you." I was stunned. The weight of her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I felt the tears start to form in my eyes. Not because I was sad, quite the opposite. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Ava wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing me of being selfish like the others had. I exhaled a shaky breath. "Ava, I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't just a house to me, it was everything that I've had to fight against my whole life. But I didn't expect this much backlash. I didn't expect to lose everyone." "I know," she replied softly. "I don't agree with how they've reacted. But I think they're afraid of what you did. It's not just about the house. It's about what it represents to them. You're not supposed to be the one to make that kind of move. You're supposed to stay in line. To follow the script." Her words resonated deeply. Ava understood. She wasn't trying to placate me or make excuses for my family. She just saw it clearly, perhaps more clearly than anyone else. They feared my independence. They feared I was breaking out of their carefully crafted narrative of who I was supposed to be. I wiped my eyes, trying to hold back the emotions that were threatening to spill over. I don't know what to do now. Everything's changed." Ava was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing softly on the other end of the line. Then she spoke again, her voice firm, yet gentle. "I think you need to let go of them. You've already let go of the house, but you haven't fully let go of them yet." The simplicity of her words hit me harder than I expected. It was true. I had been trying to cling to the fragments of my family, hoping that they would somehow come around, hoping they'd eventually understand. But I hadn't fully let go of the idea of them. The idea that I needed their approval to be happy. Ava's voice broke through the haze of doubt in my mind. You're stronger than you think, Natalie. And you don't need anyone's permission to live your life. That was the moment I realized she was right. I didn't need their permission. I had never needed their permission. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine to begin with. But now, for the first time, I was free. And as I hung up the phone, I knew that this was just the beginning. What came next wasn't about my family, or the house, or the expectations they placed on me. What came next was about me choosing my path. To be continued. You said, continue up to the ending. It must be satisfying revenge ending without death and cruelty. ChatGPT said, continued. After my conversation with Ava, something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt clear-headed. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to mend things with people who could never fully accept me for who I was. I wasn't going to beg for their approval or explain myself. The house had been just the start, a way to reclaim a small piece of myself, but I realized now that I had the power to reshape my entire life. I threw myself into my writing, pouring my emotions into every article, blog post, and personal essay. My freelance work picked up, and I began to enjoy the space I had created for myself. Slowly, the bitterness I once carried about my family began to fade. It wasn't about forgetting them, but about realizing that I didn't need their validation anymore. But my family, especially Kyle and my father, didn't let me go easily. They reached out in the following months, but their attempts were clumsy. My dad sent me an email, almost as if it were an official memo, reminding me of the value of family and telling me how disappointed he was in my actions. I didn't respond. Kyle called again, this time with more urgency, trying to make me see reason. Natalie, you're making this harder than it needs to be, he said on the phone. Dad's upset, and I don't know how we can move forward if you keep doing things like this. I felt a flicker of anger, but I reminded myself that I didn't need to engage. Kyle, I've made my decisions. And I don't want to keep going back to the past. I'm done with this. But as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I knew it wasn't over yet. It never would be with them. My actions had made an impact on them, but not the kind of impact I was looking for. It was time for me to finish what I started. The final move. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from the real estate agent handling the property where my childhood home had once stood. I had thought I was done with that place, but she informed me that the land had drawn the attention of developers. The area had started to gentrify, and the site where the house had been was now worth a lot more than I'd expected. They wanted to make me an offer. I could have just taken the money, walked away, and let things settle. But then I had an idea, one that felt both empowering and just the right kind of poetic justice. I agreed to sell them the land, but on one condition: I would personally choose the development company that would take over the site. This wasn't just about the money, it was about making sure the place was turned into something that wouldn't be tied to my past. It wouldn't be a replica of the house. It wouldn't be another attempt to hold on to a past that had never served me. I found a development company known for its sustainable, community-centered projects. They planned to build a small, green park with a community center, something that would actually benefit the neighborhood rather than just another luxury condo complex that would cater to wealthy newcomers. I made sure they understood the significance of the land, what it represented, not just to me but to the people around it. I didn't tell my family about the new plans at first. I wanted to see their reactions, knowing that they would never expect this from me. A few weeks later, I casually mentioned the park development in a group message when my cousins, Kyle, and even my dad were involved. I could almost feel the collective gasp when the message went through. Wait, you did something with the land? Kyle asked, sounding incredulous. I thought you just wanted to move on from all that. I did, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But I wanted to make sure it was turned into something meaningful. Something that doesn't have anything to do with the past we've all been trying to move past. For the first time, there was silence. No defense, no pushback. Just an uncomfortable stillness hanging between us. A few hours passed before I received a message from my father. It wasn't an apology, but it was his version of one. "You always were difficult," he wrote. "But I suppose it's your life. Just don't expect us to forgive you so easily." I couldn't help but smile as I read his message. It wasn't the apology I'd always wanted, but it was close enough. It was the acknowledgement that what I had done had made an impact. They had seen me, finally. Not as the daughter who could never live up to their expectations, but as someone who was no longer afraid to make her own choices, to burn her own path. The unexpected reaction weeks later, when the park and community center were finally completed, I visited the site on a quiet afternoon. It looked nothing like the house that had once stood there. It was a peaceful green space, with benches and walking paths, surrounded by young trees and blooming flowers. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of new beginnings." I smiled at the irony of it. My father would never understand the significance of what I had done. But I did. The next surprise came when Ava reached out again. This time, she wasn't apologizing or expressing regret. She was thanking me. "You were right," she said. "About everything. That house was never really our home. It was just a symbol of everything that was wrong with us. What you did was bold. And it changed everything. I think it's the only way any of us would ever really move on." It was the most genuine acknowledgement I'd received, and it felt like a small victory in its own right. Ava was the only one in the family who had really understood. The final piece of my revenge came when my cousins, the ones who had blocked me, reached out, apologizing. "We didn't understand what you were trying to do," one of them wrote. "But we see it now. We're sorry." I knew they didn't fully get it, but that was enough. The fact that they could acknowledge what I had done, and that it had been meaningful to more than just me, was a small, but satisfying, win. Kyle, still a little stubborn, never did fully admit he understood. But then again, that was never the point. The point was that I no longer needed their approval. The point was that I had found my own success, in my own way, on my own terms. The park became a place for me to go when I needed to remember how far I'd come. The grass was soft beneath my feet, the sounds of children laughing echoed through the air, and I felt, for the first time in my life, that I had created something that was truly mine. A space where I could finally breathe, free from their expectations, free from the family that had tried to define me.